Welcome to Crime Story with Camila, where we dive deep into the most chilling and mysterious true crime cases. If you love real-life crime stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you the most in-depth investigations and untold stories. This is the story of Brent Sikkema, a celebrated art dealer whose prestigious gallery in Manhattan showcased some of the most influential contemporary artists. A man whose name commanded respect in the art world, whose eye for talent was unmatched. But behind the gallery walls and lavish art exhibitions, a storm was brewing in his personal life, one that would lead to a brutal and shocking crime. At the center of this story is a marriage unraveling. Brent and his husband, Daniel Sikkema, had built a life together, but cracks began to form, cracks that would lead to accusations, disputes, and ultimately, a deadly confrontation. On a fateful night in January 2024, Brent Sikkema was found murdered in his luxurious Rio de Janeiro home. The crime sent shockwaves through the art community and beyond. The question on everyone's mind: who could have wanted him dead? As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of marital disputes, allegations of a murder-for-hire plot, and the devastating consequences of a broken relationship. What really happened behind closed doors? Was this a crime of passion, a calculated act of vengeance, or something even more sinister? Tonight, we unravel the details of this chilling case. Stay with us as we dive into the life and death of Brent Sikkema, the investigation that followed, and the shocking revelations that would shake the world of high art. Brent Sikkema was not just any art dealer. He was a visionary. Originally from the United States, he carved out a name for himself in the competitive world of contemporary art. His journey began in the 1970s when he worked as a photographer and curator before stepping into the high-stakes art business. With a sharp eye for talent, he co-founded Sikkema Jenkins and Company, a prestigious gallery in Manhattan known for representing some of the most respected artists of our time. His gallery showcased works by groundbreaking artists, drawing collectors, celebrities, and art enthusiasts from all over the world. Wealth, prestige, and influence surrounded Brent. He had built an empire. But behind the grandeur of art exhibitions and million-dollar deals, his personal life was far from picture-perfect. In contrast to Brent's well-established career, Daniel Sikkema's background was less publicly known. The two met years before, and despite their differences, they formed a bond that eventually led to marriage. However, like many relationships, theirs was not without its struggles. Friends and colleagues described their marriage as complex, marked by deep affection but also frequent disputes. Brent, being a prominent figure in the art world, lived a high-profile life, while Daniel preferred to stay out of the limelight. Over time, tensions in their relationship grew. Disagreements escalated, and what once seemed like a strong partnership began to unravel. Sources close to the couple revealed that one of the biggest points of contention was the idea of an open marriage. Brent, embracing the fluid nature of relationships, reportedly suggested the arrangement, but Daniel was resistant. This disagreement sowed the seeds of distrust and resentment between them. The more they argued, the more their marriage strained under the weight of conflicting desires and expectations. Adding to the turmoil, legal and financial matters became another battleground. With Brent's considerable wealth and assets, including properties, investments, and valuable artwork, the looming possibility of a bitter divorce raised the stakes. The question of who would walk away with what added another layer of tension. It was a slow descent into chaos. And then, in early 2024, the cracks turned into fractures that would soon lead to murder. Brent and Daniel Sikkema's marriage was once seen as a solid union, built on years of companionship and shared experiences. However, beneath the surface, unresolved conflicts and growing tensions slowly eroded the foundation of their relationship. What started as love and partnership eventually spiraled into heated arguments, betrayal, and ultimately, a murder that stunned the art world. Brent Sikkema, a man of refined taste and success, had spent decades curating masterpieces and navigating the elite circles of the art world. Daniel, his younger husband, was a private individual, often overshadowed by Brent's towering presence in the industry. Friends and colleagues noted that their personalities often clashed. Brent was social, outgoing, and ambitious, while Daniel preferred a quieter, more reserved life. Despite their differences, they had built a life together. Their relationship, at first, seemed solid, but as time passed, cracks began to form. Brent's demanding career meant frequent travel, lavish parties, and networking events, leaving Daniel feeling increasingly isolated. As Brent continued to thrive professionally, Daniel struggled to find his place in their shared world. This imbalance became a source of friction. One of the major turning points in their relationship was Brent's suggestion of an open marriage. He had always been progressive in his views on relationships, believing in flexibility and freedom. However, Daniel was not as accepting of the idea. He wanted exclusivity, stability, and commitment. The mere suggestion of opening their marriage was, to him, a betrayal. Arguments over infidelity, trust, and loyalty became more frequent. Accusations were thrown, tempers flared, and the love they once shared started turning into resentment. Sources close to the couple revealed that their fights often ended in silence, long, tense stretches where neither spoke to the other, their home becoming a battleground of unspoken frustrations. Money, as it often does, became another contentious issue. Brent had amassed significant wealth over the years. His Manhattan gallery, real estate investments, and high-profile connections made him a powerful figure in the art industry. But with the marriage on the rocks, discussions about financial entanglements and assets became a source of conflict. Daniel, who had been financially dependent on Brent to some extent, feared being left with nothing if a divorce were to happen. Their disputes escalated to legal threats, with Brent reportedly seeking legal advice on how to protect his assets. This only fueled Daniel's anger, deepening the divide between them. By late 2023, their relationship had become toxic, filled with arguments, legal threats, and deep-seated resentment. Daniel was reportedly feeling cornered, watching his marriage slip away along with the financial security he had become accustomed to. What was once love had turned into a power struggle, one driven by jealousy, betrayal, and financial uncertainty. And then, in January 2024, the tensions that had been simmering for months finally boiled over, leading to a brutal and tragic end. January 2024. What had been a long, drawn-out battle of emotions, betrayal, and financial uncertainty was about to reach its horrifying climax. Brent Sikkema, the wealthy and renowned art dealer, had no idea that this night would be his last. The luxurious life he had built, the high-society connections he had cultivated, and the fortune he had amassed, none of it could protect him from the darkness lurking within his own home. The night of the crime. It was a seemingly ordinary evening in Rio de Janeiro, where Brent owned a lavish property. The city's beauty, the warm tropical air, and the serenity of his home should have been a place of comfort, but that night, it became the setting for a gruesome murder. Reports indicate that Brent and Daniel had been engaged in yet another heated argument, this one more intense than the others. Witnesses, including neighbors and staff, later recalled hearing raised voices, the sound of glass shattering, and, most chillingly, a sudden, eerie silence. What happened next remains the subject of investigation and legal proceedings, but what is known is this: Brent Sikkema was found dead in his home, the victim of a violent attack. It was the early hours of the morning when the silence of Brent Sikkema's Rio de Janeiro residence was broken by the arrival of emergency responders. A call had been placed, a frantic, desperate voice on the other end reporting a horrifying scene inside the art dealer's luxurious home. What first responders found upon arrival would shock the art world and send ripples through high society. The moment officers stepped inside, they were met with chaos. Furniture overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, blood, lots of it. And at the center of it all, Brent Sikkema, lifeless. The man who had spent decades curating beauty was now the subject of a brutal crime scene. His body bore signs of a violent struggle. Blood spattered the walls and furniture, indicating that the attack had been frenzied, personal. This was not a clean, calculated assassination. This was raw, emotional rage unleashed in its most terrifying form. Forensic experts would later reveal that Brent had suffered multiple stab wounds, his body showing defensive injuries. He had fought back, desperately trying to defend himself against his killer. But in the end, the struggle had been futile. The call to emergency services came from inside the house. And when police arrived, they found only one other person there, Daniel Sikkema. He was visibly shaken, his clothes stained with blood. He claimed he had found Brent in that horrific state and had called for help immediately. But something about his story wasn't adding up. Daniel's emotions shifted rapidly, from grief to panic, from shock to an almost eerie calmness. Investigators watched closely. Was this the reaction of a man who had just lost his husband in a brutal attack? Or was this the behavior of someone desperately trying to cover his tracks? As investigators combed through the home, one crucial detail stood out. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No shattered windows. Whoever had done this had either been let in willingly or had already been inside when the attack happened. The evidence pointed to a horrifying possibility. Brent had known his killer. And in a home shared by only two people that night, suspicion fell heavily on Daniel. As detectives began questioning Daniel, inconsistencies in his story began to emerge. He claimed to have walked in on Brent's body after returning from a short drive, but security footage from the residence's cameras suggested otherwise. He had been home for far longer than he admitted. Then there was the matter of the blood. Forensic analysis revealed that Daniel's clothes had not just been stained by proximity to the body. There were blood spatter patterns that suggested he had been near Brent during the fatal blows. The pieces were coming together, and the story Daniel was telling wasn't matching the evidence. Had a night of heated arguments spiraled into deadly violence? Or was there something even more sinister beneath the surface? The truth was beginning to unravel, and authorities were closing in on their prime suspect. But was Daniel really the killer? Or was there another piece to the puzzle still missing? As police combed through the scene, they gathered physical evidence, forensic samples, and security footage from inside the home. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Daniel, whose erratic behavior and history of disputes with Brent made him the prime suspect. But was this an act of blind rage? Or was there something even more sinister at play? Neighbors reported hearing an argument earlier in the evening, while others spoke of Brent's fears about his deteriorating relationship. One source close to the couple claimed Brent had recently confided that he no longer felt safe in his own home. Was this paranoia? Or did he sense the danger looming? As investigators dug deeper, shocking revelations emerged. There were whispers of a possible murder-for-hire plot, suggestions that Daniel may have sought outside help to get rid of Brent once and for all. Was Daniel capable of such a calculated move? Or was he simply a desperate man pushed to his breaking point? What followed would be a legal battle filled with twists and turns, leaving the art world and the public in shock. As authorities built their case, the true motive behind the murder slowly began to take shape. But was Daniel truly responsible? Or was there another hand in Brent Sikkema's untimely death? Investigators also retrieved security footage from Brent's Rio de Janeiro residence, which contradicted Daniel's initial statements. He had told police he arrived home late that night and discovered Brent's body, but camera footage revealed that Daniel had never left the house at all during the time frame of the murder. Phone records further complicated his alibi. Call logs revealed that Brent had sent a text to a close friend earlier that evening, saying, "He's getting worse. I need to get out of here." But the message was never followed by a call for help. Instead, it was followed by silence. With mounting evidence against him, Daniel Sikkema was brought into police custody for further questioning. Investigators needed answers, and the inconsistencies in his statements had only deepened their suspicions. The interrogation room, cold and sterile, became the stage for one of the most intense interrogations in recent history. Daniel sat across from the lead detective, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the cup of water placed before him. His demeanor was a mix of nervousness and defiance. He maintained that he had found Brent's body, panicked, and called for help. But investigators weren't convinced. Detectives laid out the evidence before him. The inconsistencies in his timeline, the security footage, the partially cleaned knife. They pushed him, asking why he had initially claimed to have left the house when the footage proved otherwise. Why had there been no forced entry? Why did his clothes have blood spatter patterns consistent with someone who had been near the victim during the attack? At first, Daniel doubled down. "I told you, I walked in and saw him like that." He snapped, his voice cracking. But as the hours wore on, his story began to shift. He admitted that he and Brent had fought that night. That voices had been raised. That emotions had boiled over. "He was always trying to control me," Daniel muttered under his breath. But when asked if the fight had turned physical, he hesitated. Then came the moment detectives had been waiting for. When confronted with the forensic analysis of the knife, the traces of Brent's blood, the partial prints wiped clean, Daniel's composure faltered. He shook his head, his breathing uneven. "That's not possible," he whispered. The detectives leaned in. "Then explain how it got there, Daniel." Silence filled the room. His hands clenched into fists. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. And then, in a barely audible voice, he said, "I just wanted him to stop." The room went still. The lead detective pressed further. "You wanted him to stop what, Daniel?" Another long pause. Then, finally, a tear rolled down Daniel's cheek as he muttered, "He wouldn't let me leave." It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough. Investigators now had motive, physical evidence, and a suspect whose story had changed too many times to be believed. At 11:42 p.m., Daniel Sikkema was formally arrested for the murder of his husband, Brent Sikkema. As the officers placed handcuffs around his wrists, Daniel didn't resist. He only whispered one last phrase as they led him out of the room. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But the case was far from over. Now, prosecutors would take over, and the trial of Daniel Sikkema would become one of the most talked about cases in high society. Was this a crime of passion, or was there something even darker lurking beneath the surface? While Daniel Sikkema's arrest was a major breakthrough, investigators knew he hadn't acted alone. Brent Sikkema's murder wasn't a random act of violence, it was a calculated execution. The next step in the investigation was tracking down the person who had actually carried out the killing. With digital forensics and financial records in hand, authorities traced a series of encrypted messages and cash withdrawals leading to a second suspect, an individual with a criminal history and alleged ties to contract killings. Investigators also found surveillance footage showing an unknown man near Brent's residence on the night of the murder. He matched the description of a person who had been seen following Brent in the days prior to his death. Phone records revealed even more. Just days before the murder, Daniel had exchanged multiple messages with this individual. Some messages were vague, "We're still on for tomorrow?" while others were chillingly direct. In one text, Daniel allegedly wrote, "Handle it. No mistakes." Then, after the murder, the suspect received another message from Daniel, "It's done?" To which the suspect replied, "Yes. All clear." These digital breadcrumbs led authorities straight to their second suspect, and it was only a matter of time before they moved in. On February 5th, 2024, law enforcement tracked down the alleged hitman at a motel outside of Miami. He was arrested without incident, though reports indicate he attempted to dispose of a burner phone moments before officers breached his room. During the search, police found large amounts of cash, some of it traced back to withdrawals made from Daniel's accounts. Forensic analysts also discovered a pair of gloves and dark clothing matching the description given by witnesses on the night of the murder. Ballistics experts were soon able to match a knife found in the suspect's possession to the weapon used to kill Brent Sikkema. DNA swabs from the gloves also linked him to the crime scene. With this overwhelming evidence, the suspect, whose name has not been publicly disclosed, was formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and obstruction of justice. With both Daniel Sikkema and the alleged hitman now behind bars, the case has entered its next critical phase, the courtroom battle that will determine their fate. Daniel Sikkema, once a man who moved in elite art circles, now faces charges that could see him spend the rest of his life in prison. He has been indicted on multiple federal counts, including conspiracy to commit murder for hire, obstruction of justice, and passport fraud, the latter charge stemming from an alleged attempt to flee the country after the murder. If convicted, Daniel could face life in prison without the possibility of parole, and given the nature of the crime, prosecutors have not ruled out seeking the death penalty. Meanwhile, the alleged hitman is charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors have built a strong case, relying on forensic evidence, digital communications, and financial records directly linking him to Brent Sikkema's murder. Sources close to the investigation suggest that authorities are considering offering the hitman a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Daniel. If he cooperates, his sentence could be reduced, but that decision is yet to be finalized. Daniel Sikkema has pleaded not guilty, maintaining his innocence despite the mounting evidence. His legal team has indicated they will argue that he had no role in planning the murder and that any messages exchanged with the alleged hitman were misinterpreted. One possible defense strategy is to claim that Daniel was being blackmailed by the hitman or that the suspect acted alone in an unrelated robbery attempt. However, legal experts believe that with financial records, surveillance footage, and digital communications tying him to the crime, the prosecution holds a significant advantage. Prosecutors, on the other hand, are expected to paint a picture of a calculated crime, one driven by greed, control, and desperation. They will argue that Daniel saw Brent as an obstacle to his financial freedom and that he orchestrated the murder in an attempt to claim assets and avoid a costly divorce settlement. The case has sent shockwaves through the art world, with many of Brent Sikkema's colleagues and friends calling for justice. Some of the biggest names in the industry have spoken out, describing Brent as a generous patron of the arts whose life was cut short by betrayal. True crime enthusiasts and legal analysts have closely followed the case, speculating on the trial's outcome. With the high-profile nature of the crime and the involvement of a wealthy art dealer, the trial is expected to be one of the most widely watched courtroom dramas of the year. Both Daniel and the alleged hitman remain in custody as they await trial. Preliminary hearings are set to begin in the coming months, with prosecutors and defense teams preparing for a lengthy legal battle. For Brent Sikkema's loved ones, justice cannot come soon enough. But with so many twists and shocking revelations in this case, one thing is certain: the final chapter has yet to be written.
Thanks for watching. For more interesting videos, please subscribe.